All right, so this is another kind of weird lecture. These lectures, like I said, are weird, but this is during a weird time. This is right when I discovered the quadrant model. So again, I was in college, and like I said, what I would do is I was going around and I was writing down like my life, like what was going on, because I saw myself as like Socrates. So I'd have conversations with people, and I tried to make them profound, right? And like I would try to find significance in things that were happening. Now, again, people say that's a symptom of schizophrenia, like over saliency. But I was trying to see, because like I said, I saw reality as like a dream. So like I said, I was following like signs in reality. Like if there was a spider, I would stop what I'm doing, or, if stuff like that, right? But I don't think I never was schizophrenic. I never had any mental illness. But one thing that happened was, like I remember I was very concerned, like I said, my grandpa taught me a lot of metapsychiatry or transpersonal psychology stuff. So like one thing that he taught me was this idea about like that the self is an illusion. So like these paradoxes of like eating can be self-confirmatory, but also it could be represent a desire to transcend the self, because when you eat, it takes your mind off of your thoughts, and it puts your mind on your eating. And also like you could eat so much that you explode. So like gluttony could be self-confirmatory and self-indulgence, but it also could paradoxically represent a desire to transcend the self by exploding, right? So stuff like that. And so and one other thing like I was really into at the time was like, the idea of simulacra, or the idea that, things are an illusion. And that's what my grandpa was basically teaching me, that reality is an illusion. So he would talk about like, the physical reality is an illusion, but so like one time I went to a strip club, right? And the stripper was like really into me, right? So I talked to my grandpa when I visited my grandpa in Kauai. This was when I was in college. I visited him in Kauai, and I told him about how a strip club is kind of profound in the sense that that you can't really tell what's real and what's not. Like the stripper, she acts like she loves you, right? She's like, "Oh, you're so awesome, I love you," and but really, she just wants to get money. She just wants a dance from you. So, and I wanted to extrapolate that to, how do you know what's really real in life anywhere? Do people just want stuff from you? And, and it goes all the way down ontologically to, is anything even real at all? And that goes to Dr. Horace stuff. That my grandpa's teacher was Dr. Hora, but I didn't really study his stuff until like 2020. But, Dr. Horace said everything is a hologram. So in that sense, nothing is really real. But is it real? The stripper seems to like you, but she doesn't really like you. But in the same sense, like, my grandpa would say the flow is real though. So, and that would be transcending like dualistic software. But I'll get to that later. But at the time, I didn't understand that. But I remember like I was trying to find like significance and stuff, right? So like and again, like in my mind, I was thinking I'm the Messiah. So I was thinking that I knew that something big was going to happen, right? And I'm not going to go into details about all the synchronicities that I had and stuff like that, right? But but basically what ended up happening was, like I said, I was writing down my conversations I was having with people. So like I was hanging out with this guy Malcolm, and I was hanging out with my friend Michael Masad, and we were having like a lot of philosophical conversations, and I would tell Michael about the things like my grandpa taught me. Like one thing my grandpa taught me was a story, interestingly, of the person who was healed by Mary or not Mary. There was this woman, and she was like sick, right? Or no, her daughter was sick, and she went to Jesus and said, "Can you heal my daughter?" And Jesus said, "I do not give bread to the dogs." And she says, "Even a dog will accept scraps." So then he says, "Your daughter's healed." And my grandpa said what happened was the woman went from being pushy and demanding and, being arrogant, like stuck in the ego, to being humble. And so my grandpa said she went from being pushy and demanding to being, and pushy, demanding, pleading, and desperate. She went from that to being, and I forget what it was, like persistent and determined. And she became humble. And then because she had a transformation, her daughter had a transformation, because my grandpa said, basically the idea is everything is one. So the mother, a transformation of the mother will have an effect on the daughter, right? So that was interesting. So I would talk to my friends about this stuff. But like I said, I was always kind of anti-white and always kind of a Marxist because I saw myself as Jewish. So like I remember when I was with my friend Brian, he was an Asian guy from Taiwan, but he was kind of racist against black people. But I was always like, black people, there's no difference between black people and white people. The reason why, because in my friend Michael, he asked me, why is it that more white people are in chemistry and in doctors and stuff? And I said, well, it's stereotype because they see, white people see other white people who are doctors because of the culture. And the culture started off with more white people as doctors, so other white people see it, and it's a stereotype effect and then they think I can do that. And I told Michael, everyone knows that chemistry is very difficult. Like, we take chemistry and it's very difficult, but we continue because we see other people who look like us. But Michael was actually Egyptian, but I was like, we see other people who look like us, but the black people, they don't see anybody else that looks like them. So they're facing the challenges and they think, well, maybe I'm just not cut out for this. So like I said, I always wanted to put black people up kind of on a pedestal. And because I wanted to see, I was very into UCSD because UCSD, they taught like racist social construction. I really like that because I'm like, yeah, black people and white people, they're the same. And we should race mix. And because like I said, I think it's because I saw myself as Jewish. So I was really into the idea of race mixing. And but maybe there's some truth to what I was saying though too. Yeah, stereotype effect. But I wanted to be like, yeah, the differences, and even I wanted to be like, yeah, and the differences between black people and white people with basketball. That stereotype effect. It's because black people grew up in the ghetto, and the only outlet is basketball, and the only way to get out of the ghetto is basketball and sports and stuff. So they become better. And white people, they look at the black people who are all athletes and they think, well, I won't do that because I'm not meant to do that. Because look at all the people. And it becomes like a self-perpetuating loop. Because I say, look at all the people who play basketball. They're all black. But I say, but it's because of culture. It's because of environment. And if it was the other way around, if white people grew up in the ghetto, then there'd be more white, athletes and stuff like that. But, deep down, though, I kind of knew that it wasn't true. Like, I felt like it wasn't true. But I wanted to believe that because really what I wanted was race mixing and say there is no difference. It's all social construction. But I remember I told one of my friends, I was like, yeah, there was once a time when Jews were considered the best at basketball because Jews grew up in the ghetto. But at the same time, though, I wanted to think that Jews were actually more black because I wanted to see more people who were more black as superior. So, let me think about that. Yeah. So, and even, like I said, deep down, I want to see black people superior. So I remember one time when I visited my grandpa in Kauai, I told him, because my grandpa had more curly hair. And I was like, grandpa, I think that you might be more black. And I saw myself as more black because I want to see black as superior. But my grandpa said that sounded like dualistic software, but I didn't understand what he was talking about at the time. Because in my mind, I was like I said, I misinterpreted my grandpa's teaching. So when my grandpa's saying dualistic software, I'm like, yeah, transcend dualistic software. Let's all race mix. Transcend, but I didn't realize that was actually dualistic software, that was calculative, rational thinking. And that because I saw myself as Jewish, I wanted race mixing. So, but I remember my grandpa, I went to my grandpa's place. This was in my sophomore year of college or my freshman year. And my grandpa and grandma were telling me how they didn't like my mom pretty much because my mom was really mean to my uncle. And they said that she's a name caller and stuff. And I had faced that. I had faced the name calling and stuff. But like I said, my mom didn't realize that. My mom thought that my grandpa liked her, but I'll get to that more later. But so I was going to my grandpa's place and, but I was kind of a Marxist and I was anti-white Marxist and I think it's because I saw myself as Jewish. But, and I'll get to the whole INTP stuff that I started studying later and how this kind of shaped my mind too. But I'll get to that. But so, but like I said, at the time I was trying to follow my grandpa's teaching. So my grandpa was teaching me, if you're in the flow, you're not attached to anything. But I like that because I'm like, yeah, you're not attached to anything. So we should all be communists and we should not be attached to anything. Because like I said, I saw capitalism as more white supremacist and maintaining the status quo, and communism as more, for black people, right? Because it's give to the black people. And I noticed that usually the white supremacists were anti-communist. So I wanted to be a communist because I saw myself as Jewish and I saw myself as more black. And so... And now my grandpa would say that's because I was expressing dualistic software. I wasn't in the flow, but I didn't know that at the time because I didn't understand my grandpa's teachings. So I misinterpreted my grandpa's teachings and misappropriated them. So another thing that my grandpa taught me a lot was be independent. Being independent is really important. So I started to try to imbibe the idea of being independent. So like when I was hanging out with my friend Malcolm, like my friend Malcolm would be like, hey, Ryan, I'll get you some water. You know, like, just sit down and I'll get you some water. I'd be like, no, dude, let me get it. Because I'd be like, I need, you know, my grandpa talks about the importance of being independent and not being dependent on anybody. So I'm going to be independent. And, you know, I didn't really understand yet because I hadn't really studied the basketball videos. I hadn't really watched, because like I said, it took me a long time to figure out that it was a shoot away machine that messed up my shot. But I started figuring it out because I started watching the basketball videos that I got from my mom when I was in college. And I saw... So what happened was I was looking at the videos and I saw me picking the ball off the rack and going like this, and then me shooting my left foot in front of my right, and that's what my dad was yelling at me about. He was like, "You're shooting square." And then my dad told me, "Well, pick the ball off the rack and go like this." But then I started noticing when I was younger, I didn't pick the ball off I didn't move into shots like this. I would move into shots like this, you know, stepping back with the right leg and doing stuff like that, or even like catch it and spinning the shots. But anyways, it's all about how you move into the shots. So you catch it with your right leg back and, you know, stuff like that, or sidestepping like this. And you know, it's all about how you move into the shot. So I started realizing, oh, it was a shoot-away machine. That's what messed up my shot. So, but then, you know, but anyways, like I said, but my grandpa, like, his whole thing was, at the time, he didn't know it was a shoot-away machine that messed up my shot. His whole thing was, you know, when he came in high school, he was like, oh, this is normal. What happened is Ryan just wants independence, and that's why he's fighting with his dad. No, the reason why the fights happened with my dad wasn't because I wanted independence. It was because the shoot away messed up my shot. My dad was telling me to shoot wrong. And if it wasn't for that, I know that none of the fights would have happened. But, you know, at this time in college, I'm thinking like, yeah, you know, being independent is really important. We should all just be independent. And, you know, maybe that is the thing. We should all just be independent. Because that's my grandpa's big thing, because my grandpa's a big Ayn Rand fan. So like I said, I was trying to understand my grandpa's teachings. And Ayn Rand's all about, like, be independent. So in a way that I recognized, I thought it was like white supremacist a little bit, because it's like, yeah, be independent and work hard. And, you know, and it's kind of anti-Marxist. So, and I was a Marxist. I was pro-black, but at the same time, like, I was trying to understand my grandpa's teachings and trying to follow them. So, like, even I got a job and I was working, like at the Remax Center, right? And because I was trying to do what my grandpa taught, right? But then, as I said before, I ended up discovering the quadrant model. So what happened was, and this is again, weird stuff, right? So like I said, I was following signs. I was following, like, I got to the point where I would follow. Yeah, I was following, like, basically I was kind of losing it, but like not really though. So like I remember I went to a restaurant, and okay, so what this is what ended up happening. I was talking to my grandpa on the phone, and my grandpa told me about a personality type model where there's 4 types of people: thinking people, emotional people, doers, and dreamers. And he told me that he thought I was a dreamer. And this was my sophomore year of college, the beginning of sophomore year. Like I said, I just quit basketball at this time. So when I had just quit basketball, because like I said, I thought to myself, I'm going to be a famous rapper, so I'm just going to focus on my rap music. And also, like, somehow something told me that I was going to be the Messiah. I knew that I was going to be the Messiah. And so it's weird, but I ended up just quitting basketball. And then so I was talking to my grandpa on the phone, and my grandpa told me about this personality type model where there's 4 types of people. But I was thinking, why is there 4 types of people and not 3? And my grandpa said that I was a dreamer, but I was like, no, man, I'm more of a doer, because I'm a basketball player, I'm a rapper. You know, I was thinking I'm more of a doer, but my grandpa was calling me a dreamer. So, but I was like, you know, why is there 3 types of people? Why is there 4 types of people and not 3? Because I always preferred the number 3. And like I said, I always did rituals around the number 3. Like I would count to 3 times looking down, and count to 3 times looking up, and stuff like that, right? So it's kind of obsessive compulsive disorder, right? And I probably do have obsessive compulsive disorder, but that's not the reason why my dad beat me up. That's what my mom wants to say. She wants to say my dad beat me up because I was mentally ill. No, it's because of the shoot away machine. That's what happened. But anyways, my grandpa told me about this personality type model where there's 4 types of people. Then I was reading the Bible, the first time I ever read the New Testament. No, but before this, before that, I'll get to this though. I went to a restaurant, and I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, they called me as I was like number 4. Remember, everybody has a number when they're at the restaurant, and they said number 4. And that whole day I was thinking, why is there 3 types of people? And I mean, why is there 4 types of people and not 3? I preferred the number 3, but then I got number 4 at the restaurant, and I'm like, this is a sign. Like, there's something about the number 4. And I remember I was sitting on a table. Now this is again, I'm always reluctant to say this type of stuff because people might say I'm making stuff up. But I was sitting at a table, and I was reading about phantom limb, and then 3 drops of water hit my book, and it was a sunny day. Now, what I ended up later, I was listening to a lecture on African mythology, and there was something that said that when the Messiah comes, their Messiah, there's going to be 3 drops of water that land on a sunny day or something like that. And that happened to me. Now, I'm reluctant to say that because now people are going to think I'm making shit up. But I'm pretty sure that happened to me. But that happened like that. I was reading the Phantom Limb thing, and then there was 3 drops of water. Okay, so this is when stuff gets weird. Then I go to my apartment and I'm reading. Oh, and I was talking to my grandma on the phone. I called my grandma, and my grandma was like, "Ryan, you know, because you're not playing basketball anymore, because you quit basketball, you need to be careful about how you eat because, you know, you're not going to be exercising as much." So I was like, okay. And she said something, and then somebody outside was walking by and said something about like the body's a temple. It was like weird. It was weird, like these synchronicities, right? Because I had my window open. So then I'm thinking about the body, right? And I was thinking about the phantom limb, and I think that there's some coincidence to that, because then I was thinking about thinking, emotion, doing, dreaming, and earlier that week I had gone to a psychology lecture where the teacher said that when you're dreaming, you're separated from your body, but you do things physically, but you're paralyzed, so you don't act it out. So it's kind of like phantom limb, and kind of like, so it's interesting that I had these synchronicities with the body right before that. But so I'm reading the New Testament on the chapter of Jesus crucified. I'm not making this up. Now, again, this is all these synchronicities coming together, right? This is where it gets crazy. And I'm on the chapter of Jesus crucified, and I draw a cross in the Bible, and I put that down the 4 types of people: thinking people, emotional people, doers, dreamers, in the 4 quadrants. And so I'm thinking about this, and I thought, okay, thoughts affect emotions, emotions affect thoughts. Because earlier that week, my other grandpa gave me a physics lecture, a physics DVD from the teaching company, where they're saying that there's the strong force, the weak force, electromagnetism, and gravity. And they're saying there's these 4 forces, and each one is different, but each one is like different versions of the same thing. They're all interconnected. So I was thinking, okay, well, thoughts affect emotions, emotions affect thoughts. They're different versions of the same thing. They're different aspects of one thing. And I thought, okay, and then emotions cause us to do things, but when we do things, we have thoughts, and they affect our thoughts. And I thought, okay, so we have a trinity. And I thought, okay, and then when we dream, we're disconnected from our body, but we have thoughts and we have emotions, and we do things. So I thought, okay, the 4th is separate, but it contains the first 3. So this is when I discovered the theory of everything. So I was like, that was a big revelation. I was like, it's separate, but it contains. Because earlier, when I was visiting my grandpa, I think it was my freshman year of college. Yeah, when I visited my grandpa, he had a book called The Theory of Everything by Ken Wilber. And it had a quadrant model in it, but it's not this quadrant model. It was where he talks about interior subjective, interior objective, interior exterior subjective, and exterior objective. So the 4 types, right? And he had a quadrant, and he said that all knowledge could be put in those 4 quadrants, right? So, but in his thing, he talked about transcending and including. Each stage, each step transcends but includes the steps before. So I was thinking, that's the same thing with thinking, emotion, doing, dreaming. Each one transcends but includes the ones before. And dreaming transcends but includes thinking, emotion, doing, dreaming. Or thinking, emotion, and doing. And then that was when I had the realization. I was like, okay. And I started thinking, okay, there's a 4 forces where it's the same type of thing where gravity's different. They can't fit gravity. So it's like that 4th different one. But I was like, but it transcends but includes, because you can't have gravity without electromagnetism and strong force and weak force. So I thought, okay. And I started thinking of other examples of this pattern. And I was like, dude, and I was thinking of it everywhere. And then that's when I discovered theory of everything. And then so the next day, again, at the time, maybe I was going schizotypal. Maybe I was going schizophrenic at the time. Like I said, I was following signs. So I remember like there was white birds flying. So I started following, there were white birds and black birds together flying. So I was like, okay, this is a good sign. And I was following that. And I ended up going to my biology class. Like this is where it gets weird, right? Because like I said, I was like, at the time I was thinking reality is like a dream. So it's going to give me signs and stuff, right? So I went to my biology class, and then they were talking about the 4 types of DNA and the 4 carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen making up everything. So then I'm just like, dude, I discovered theory of everything. So then I was in my biology class, I went to the bathroom, and I drew a quadrant below the thinking, emotion, doing, dreaming. And I put in it contemplation, passion, flowing, knowing. So I'll get to that in the next lecture. But what I realized was, okay, I thought dreaming is separate, but it contains the first 3. But then it points to what comes after it, which is contemplation, which is when you transcend the self. Contemplation, passion, flowing, knowing. Because passion is when you transcend the self. It's a byproduct of transcending the self. And I thought flowing is transcendence of the self, and knowing is transcendence of the self, because you can't know unless they say you only God knows. You can't know unless you die. And then contemplation, that's when you think very deeply. It's transcendence of the ego. So I thought, okay, dreaming contains the first three, thinking, motion, doing, dreaming, but then it points to what comes after it, contemplation, because dreaming is an aspect of transcending the self, because you die to the self in the dreaming. And then I drew another quadrant, and the first quadrant, sensation, perception, response, awareness, and then the second quadrant, belief, faith, behavior, belonging. So I'll get to that in the next lecture.